Running from one side of Arizona to the other, Santa Fe's main line is a double-tracked ribbon of steel stretched out across the northern part of the state. The beautiful southwestern United States, combined with Santa Fe's heavy action, make this a railroad photographer's paradise. Along the border between California and Arizona, the Santa Fe main line crosses over the Colorado River on a massive steel bridge. Interstate Highway 40 parallels the railroad, and several pipelines cross over the water. This scenic location is known as Topak. An eastbound train crosses over the river from California to begin its 385-mile journey across Santa Fe's Arizona main line. The train will travel through the most diverse scenery on the entire Santa Fe system. The double-track main line climbs from an elevation of 520 feet here at Topak to the highest point on the entire railroad at Reardon. There, the rails reach a height of 7,334 feet as they crest the summit. At the opposite end of the state, on the New Mexico-Arizona border, a westbound begins its trip across the Grand Canyon State as a gale-force wind whips across the desert. We'll follow the main line from here, west, across the state, exploring the many different faces of Arizona's mountain and desert topography. The Santa Fe is divided into 4 regions across the country. Arizona is located in the central region. The double-track main line across the state is made up of 2 subdivisions. The Gallup sub runs from Blean, New Mexico, across the eastern half of Arizona to Winslow. This part of the state is arid and generally barren country. From Winslow west to Needles, California, the Sligman sub takes over. This makes Winslow the division point and the only mainline crew change in the state. The Sligman sub is a scenic wonderland where every few miles the view is radically different. On the Gallup sub at Lupton, an eastbound empty coal train heads back toward its mine to receive yet another load for the big power plants down the Coronado sub. This train is equipped with mid-train helper engines that are operated by remote control from the head end. A caboose brings up the rear of the train. It's the only caboose we saw the entire time we spent on the Arizona Mainline. 8 units pull another empty coal train east along the banks of the normally dry Puerco River. This train is also off the Coronado sub and is returning from the TEPCO, or Tucson Electric Power Company plant near Springerville, Arizona. Near Adamana, a mysterious train rolls across the desert with its one lone boxcar. It's a peddler freight that may find more business down the line. Amtrak Train 4, the Southwest Chief, sprints through the Petrified Forest National Park. At Holbrook, the old Santa Fe station stands and is still used by the railroad. The company logo is proudly displayed up on the station. Some of the town's original buildings remain. They look like a Western movie set, but in this case, they are the real thing. An 844 train from Barstow, California to La Junta, Colorado pulls east. The Santa Fe uses an interesting system for assigning train numbers. The first digit indicates the area where the train originated. The second digit refers to the train's priority. A number 1 would be a very low priority train, and a 9 would indicate a hot, high priority train. The third digit indicates the destination of the train. The train numbers have a preceding digit which indicates how many trains departed the originating terminal on the same day with the same number. If you're listening in on the railroad's radio channels, you may hear trains referred to with a trailing digit. This last number indicates the date that the train departed its originating terminal. 0219815 therefore indicates that on the 15th of the month, a train departed Chicago, It was a very hot, high-priority train and was headed for Los Angeles. It also was the second section of that train to depart Chicago on the 15th of the month. Moving further west, out on the Seligman Sub, is one of the best-known locations along Santa Fe's Arizona Mainline. It's the famous Canyon Diablo Bridge. It's located between Winslow and Flagstaff, out on a high desert plain. The canyon presented a serious obstacle to the early railroad builders. Today's bridge is a massive steel structure built in 1947 to handle the heavy trains of this era and is double-tracked. One can still see the approach and piers of earlier bridges. The canyon is a remote and desolate area, but if you take a close look, there is beauty to be found. A new quality service train from LA to Fort Worth, Texas crosses over the bridge. This train will increase in size as shippers become aware of its schedule. The snow-capped San Francisco mountains above Flagstaff present an interesting contrast to the desert. An eastbound 757 train heads toward Winslow with a couple of shiny red and silver GE war bonnets. Winslow is a division point and divides the Arizona Mainline into the two subdivisions, the Gallup and the Seligman subs. Not much is left of the once busy yard at Winslow, but the old Harvey House Hotel remains and is used as railroad offices. The 757 train has been refueled and a new crew moves the long-distance local down to the east end of the yard. It will wait there for an inbound train to clear. Fuel levels are checked on all trains departing Winslow, as there is no fuel for 300 miles in either direction. The railroad has placed the American flag on every one of its locomotives as a tribute to the troops involved in the Persian Gulf conflict. These General Electric B40-8s were delivered in the fall of 1990. Featuring the comfort cab and new style controls, these four-axle engines are usually found on hotshot pig trains. The powerful 4,000 horsepower units are a bit overkill for this Phoenix to Blean merchandise train. Once the 448 train is through the yard throat, the dispatcher gives the 757 a clear signal to proceed. A few minutes later, this F-45 leads a lowly Blean to Barstow train into the yard with its shortcut of company cars. The west end of Winslow is perhaps one of the most dramatic approaches to a yard anywhere. The tracks make a severe dip into what the railroaders call the gap. This spectacular scene is the perfect place to catch big-time railroad action on the Santa Fe, Maine. A Richmond, California to Dallas train grinds up the grade into Winslow. The train passes through high-speed switches as it threads its way into the yard. A few minutes later, another eastbound train climbs up out of the gap, running wrong main. It has passed a slower train which can be seen cresting the far grade. This is one of Santa Fe's quality service trains and is running between LA and New York. At Chicago, the train will be handed over to Conrail for the completion of its transcontinental journey. The stack train has caught a red block at the top of the hill and slowly rises up out of the gap. The crew climbs down off the engine to inspect the Southwest Chief as it blasts by. There's still no green board for this train as the dispatcher crosses a hotshot 189 over to the north track. The lower priority stack train finally gets the signals and lugs its train up the hill. The peaks of the San Francisco Mountains, nearly 60 miles away, produce a spectacular background. Further west, between Canyon Diablo and Flagstaff, is another photogenic location, West Darling. And eastbound passes through the scenic splendor. This westbound crosses back over to the north track after having detoured around a maintenance project. At Cosnino, just east of Flagstaff, the hotshot 189 train rolls west. The freshly painted 5959 leads today's 757 train up from Phoenix. In downtown Flagstaff, the old Santa Fe station is an eye-catching tribute to another era. Amtrak's chiefs stop here daily. A set of power backs through town to get to its train as a westbound highballs on the north track. The 866 train, now back together, heads out of town. This train had set out an engine at Flagstaff for the next westbound to pick up. Later, a Kansas City to Los Angeles train stops to add the additional power to its consist. The locomotives uncouple from their train and pull ahead as the SF-30C is brought off the siding and added to the train. As the 238 waits to depart, a hot LA to Chicago Q train blasts by. The dispatcher gives the westbound a highball and they proceed to leave town with their low-priority manifest freight. At the west end of Flagstaff, an eastbound train slips down grade toward town. Between Belmont and the summit at Reardon, eastbound QLABH works up the last couple of miles to crest the mountain. This train is handed over to the Burlington Northern at Winoka, Oklahoma, where it will be forwarded on to Birmingham, Alabama. Right on his heels and running on the north track is today's 8:44 train bound for La Junta, Colorado. Most people don't associate large pine trees with Arizona. This part of the state contains the world's largest single stand of ponderosa pine. The trees live within the confines of 3 national forests. On the Santa Fe, trains tend to run in fleets. This Phoenix to Chicago pig train follows right behind the others, up and over the summit. The 528 train approaches East Williams Junction in late afternoon light. Next morning, a Q train works through East Williams Junction. This 589 train passing through West Williams Junction is entering the 1960 line relocation. The new line was built to bypass steep grades and the helper district between Williams and Ash Fork. The track branching off to the right is a connection to the old main line, now used only by Phoenix-bound trains. On another day, a Northern California-bound train rolls through the junction. An 844 train pulls hard as it nears the crest of the hill at West Williams. Just around the bend from here is where the 1960 line relocation project ends. This Barstow-bound train is now back on the old main line. In fading late afternoon light, engine number 97, restored to her original red and silver paint, hustles this Dallas to LA pig train through Crookton. In the intense mid-afternoon heat, a Chicago-bound manifest freight works upgrade into Sligman. From Sligman, the train continues up through Arizona's roller coaster terrain towards Crookton. Up until 1984, Sligman was a crew change point. Not much remains of the once busy yard, but the old Harvey House still stands with its curious territorial Spanish style of architecture. Dropping down into Sligman, a war bonnet leads its train under the signal bridges. At one time, the yard at Sligman was 11 tracks wide. This was a major livestock shipping point, and many holding pens were located here. At Pica, milepost 447, the railroad's old pumping station remains intact. Deep wells were sunk here to reach water in an area where it's scarce. Santa Fe's fleet of thirsty steam engines were kept supplied from these wells. Today, water is still pumped out of the wells, but is trucked out. A Houston to Barstow train sprints across the rolling grasslands near Pica. The ridge in the background is known as the Aubrey Cliffs. A pile driver is tucked in behind the engines for the trip across the road. The train works hard as it climbs up out of the valley to cross Yampai Hill. At Peach Springs, the 238 train rolls down grade as it passes through the Wallapai Indian Reservation. Near Valentine, the train continues its downhill run through the barren Arizona desert. The train drops down through Kingman Canyon as the last rays of sun illuminate the rugged hills. Next morning, an eastbound train approaches Topog. At this moment, the train is still on the California side of the Colorado River. This is the third bridge the Santa Fe has constructed across the Colorado River here at Topog. The present bridge was built in 1945. Most of the Q service trains haul primarily intermodal freight. The Q stands for quality and indicates that the train runs on a dedicated schedule. The QBAHO is a special train that hauls hazardous cargo between Barstow and Houston, Texas. The Houston-bound train crosses over Holy Moses Wash as it works up Kingman Canyon. Right on the heels of the Q train, this Conrail-bound freight heads into the canyon. When this train reaches Illinois, it will take the cutoff at Streeter to bypass Chicago on Conrail's line through Kankakee. It will keep its Santa Fe power all the way to the big yard at Elkhart, Indiana, and will be running as Conrail train SFEL. Another eastbound grinds its way up through the canyon, powered by 8 engines. Rounding the curve down on the lower line is a Kansas City to LA train with a mixed consist of hot cargo. A shipment of military vehicles brings up the rear of the train. GP60 number 149 is returning east today as it pulls the Chicago-bound stack train through the canyon. This curious onlooker seems fascinated with the constant flow of trains past his rocky hideout. Another westbound rolls down through the canyon. This hot train carries high-priority pigs between Chicago and Richmond, California. A loaded grain train glides down the canyon. This is export grain destined for the port of Long Beach. Heat ripples off the dynamic brakes as the engines fight gravity, holding back the heavy loads. Meanwhile, back at West Williams Junction, two hot intermodal trains meet on the fly. Later, a Kansas City to Phoenix train takes the cutoff at the junction to start down the Phoenix subdivision. The railroad uses the old main line down the steep grades to Ash Fork. There, the trains continue on to Phoenix using the Peavine line. The Phoenix-bound train drops down the 1.8% grade towards Ash Fork. Rounding a sharp curve, it's now a straight shot down to the station and crew change point. As the train pulls up toward the station, we're wondering where the rested crew is. Just about that same time, the question is answered as an old station wagon comes roaring up the gravel road. Part of the inbound crew gets off at the station. The train will move further down the line to clear a road crossing. The wagon nearly runs us over as it rushes the outbound crew down to the engines. One of the scenic highlights along the Peavine line is the big bridge at Hell Canyon near Drake. The bridge was built in 1902 during a major relocation project. It's 676 feet long and crosses 170 feet above the water. The train stopped at Drake to pick up cement loads for Phoenix and now continues on its journey. We hope you've enjoyed this tour across the ever-changing and beautiful state of Arizona. From the snow-capped mountain peaks to the rocky canyons, the tall timber to the desert scrub, Santa Fe's Arizona Mainline is truly a scenic wonder and a rail enthusiast's delight. Watch for more exciting programs from Pentrex.